Thank you, Nami, for inviting me today. So my name is Brian Serna. I own a company called Serna Solutions. We do training, consulting, and actual behavioral health services in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. And one of the things that we've been involved in, like Tom just stated, we've been doing these online trainings and also in-person training, just spreading the word about 988 as a crisis line. And so that's what I'm going to be doing with you tonight, is just giving you an overview of our materials, where we, it is a pretty broad overview of what 988 is, what the hopes are around it, and that sort of thing. And we can ask, you can ask questions and I'll answer them at any time. So you can do it in the chat box. You can also raise your hand virtually. You can also just take yourself off mute and say, "Hey, I've got a question." I'm fine with any of those. It's not too large of a group to where we have to be formal about anything, really. So let's get into it. So the slides you're about to see are the ones that are approved by the state Human Services Department. They were developed by me and my colleague Emily Everhart, who works for me at Serna Solutions. And away we go. So we like to start first and foremost with the land acknowledgement and a beautiful photo, by the way. Any guesses where this photo is from? Does anybody know? It's not from around Santa Fe, right? But you can tell it's unmistakably New Mexican, just by, I think, the sky and the clouds. So this is out near Farmington. So there's this area called the Beastie Badlands, where you see a whole lot of rock formations just like this. And it's breathtaking and so unique. And that's New Mexico. There are places in New Mexico that are absolutely stunning. And we're lucky to live here. So part of that is a land acknowledgement. So before we begin, we would like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are meeting, living, working on the traditional and unceded lands of the indigenous people who call New Mexico home, the original peoples of New Mexico, Pueblo, Navajo, Apache, since time immemorial, have deep connections to the land and have made broad, significant contributions to the community statewide. And we honor the land itself and those who remain through the strength and resilience of generations. So what is 988? So 988 is the new 911. It's the best way to think about it. The idea is to have a number that is as recognizable as 911, but for a different purpose than 911. And so 911 has been the go-to for anything that feels overwhelming for a lot of folks, right? And so this is, 911 has been the go-to if anybody feels unsafe, like they might get hurt, right? 911 is also what you call when you witness a crime. 911 is what you call when you see a fire, even on the side of the road, right? 911 is also what some people call when they fall down and they don't have anybody to help them up. 911 is what people call when they don't remember what pills they took. And sometimes 911 is what people call sometimes when they're just feeling lonely, unfortunately. And so, as you can imagine, 911 is widely utilized, and in some respects, it's overutilized, right? So the idea with 988, this 3-digit number, we're going to relieve some pressure off 911. We're going to reserve 911 for what a 911 is really good at, which is fire, rescue, and law enforcement. Everything else should go to 988. Everything else that's behavioral health and nature, and that really is everything else that's not, that doesn't involve law enforcement, fire, or rescue. So beginning this Saturday, actually 12:01 a.m. this Saturday. Anybody in the US can call 988 and it will ring a crisis line. And depending on where you are, depends on where the other person is that answers that call. And I'll get into that more in a bit. So 988 is a coordinated national effort to support 911 crisis intervention diversion for behavioral health emergencies. So what is a behavioral health crisis? So I'm lucky in that I'm talking to NAMI, because you all know very well what a behavioral health crisis is. And some groups that I talk to, it's really fuzzy for them what behavioral health is, what mental health is, all that kind of stuff. So we do spend maybe 2 slides just defining that. And so some of the reasons for calling 988 include thoughts of suicide, homicide would be in that category, mental health or substance use crisis, or any other kind of emotional distress that is overwhelming. People can also dial 988 if they are worried about a loved one who may need crisis support, right? So an example I give is, let's say you have a family member who's having a behavioral health crisis. Maybe they lock themselves in a room in your home, right? Typically, what families would do is first try to handle it themselves, and if they can't do that, then they call 911. 988 would be a much better response in that sort of situation, because the idea would be the people who respond to that call would be trained in behavioral health issues. 911 operators and also fire, rescue, and police are not typically trained in how to even de-escalate conflicts, quite frankly. Some of them are naturally good at it, though. But they're often undertrained, and that varies from department to department, but they're often not adequately trained in how to use their words to de-escalate a situation. And in some cases, in some departments, they're much better at escalating a situation than de-escalating a situation. So what might a behavioral health crisis look like? Someone feels overwhelmed due to an event like losing their job, losing a relationship, when substance use or abuse reaches a breaking point for the caller or a loved one, running out of psychiatric medications without access to a refill, experiencing a traumatic event or witnessing one, or for persons who are living with certain challenges with mental health issues, it could just be a matter of time before things just cycle. They take a turn, right? And it could be precipitated just by everyday stress or cumulative stress of just being alive right now in America, with inflation and gas prices and Roe v. Wade, and there's so many reasons why people are under a lot of stress these days. The pandemic is a huge reason, and fear of getting an illness you can't shake, huge reason. So for all of those reasons, all behavioral health systems have been widely utilized, right? And the need just keeps on getting bigger and bigger. And so, so there's a lot of things that can precipitate a behavioral health crisis. So as divided as Americans are, and make no mistake, we are divided politically. There's a lot of reasons why people get divided, right? But this is very interesting. 3/4 or 75% of Americans are not content with the status of mental health treatment in this country, regardless of political affiliation. And while 72% of respondents to a national survey have a favorable opinion of law enforcement in their own community, 4 in 5 people believe that mental health professionals should be the primary first responders when someone is having a mental health or a suicide crisis rather than law enforcement. Turns out that 911 diversion to 988 is going to be more effective. And most Americans agree. Americans do not believe that those having a mental health crisis should be taken to jail or even into police custody for help, which happens frequently in many communities. Just a little bit about me. So I've been a behavioral health provider for 25 years now, mostly in Santa Fe. I'm from Santa Fe. First job in Santa Fe. My primary location of my company is in Santa Fe. And over the years, I have heard and I've seen that for people who don't want help, the answer has been to call the cops. And if the police catch them in a crime, maybe domestic violence, maybe a DWI, maybe a possession charge, right? Now all of a sudden that person can get help. It could even be that that person might kind of sort of want help, but there's a wait list. And so a fast way to get help might be to enact law enforcement, which is really a tragedy. That's where things have been in our country is most often, the criminal justice system is the entry point to receiving behavioral health services. We want to change that, right? And the idea with 988 is it's one of many, many ways that as a society, we're hoping to start to change that. People shouldn't have to break a law, go through incarceration, go through all of that process that is dehumanizing in order to access services, right? They should just be able to present somewhere and ask for services, just show up. So the goal here is to respond to behavioral health emergencies with trained behavioral health professionals rather than law enforcement. It's more fiscally responsible to do so. If you look at the cost of behavioral health, some people think of, well, the cost of a therapist or what I paid a therapist or psychiatrist. That is not even the tip of the iceberg. That's like the two snowflakes on top of the iceberg. The bulk of the cost of behavioral health treatment in our country can be traced to incarceration and hospital admissions and ambulance trips, by the way, that take people to all those locations. All of those things are wildly expensive, when compared to just the time of a therapist or the time of a psychiatrist. The cost of providing the service at that level of care doesn't even approach what it takes to even just pay for somebody's admission into Christus St. Vincent or Presbyterian, those kinds of places. So what we want to do is somehow intervene before someone takes an ambulance to the hospital on the way to jail, right? And so that's what we're trying to do with 988. So 911 is always going to be around. There's never going to be a time when we don't need 911, right? But 911, what we want people to start associating 911 is safety. It's public safety. Safety from fire, safety from a medical emergency, and safety from criminal behavior or violence or something along those lines, right? So 911 should be focused on that, on safety when it comes to that. So 988, on the other hand, focuses on behavioral health, which is mental health and addiction combined. That both of those issues are couched under behavioral health, and they dispatch trained behavioral health professionals. But the question that often comes up is, well, what if like these? Let's just say these are social workers that we're looking at, or maybe a social worker and a peer support worker, right? So these are lay people. They don't have weapons. They don't have badges. They show up. What if they're in danger? They call 911, right? So 911 is always going to be part of our system. And I'm going to go ahead and mute folks because dogs are barking. And so, so there's always going to be a need for 911, even when 988 is not only up and running, but when 988 becomes as widely known as we hope it will be, there's always still going to be a need for 911. So how is it all supposed to work, especially the cost savings piece? So this is a graphic that's used nationally. It comes from the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. And it's been serving as a guide to help people conceptualize 988. And so we use this here in New Mexico, but we actually have a different graphic that I'll show you later that I feel is actually better than this one. But let's walk through this one first. So it starts with a person in crisis. They call a crisis line, right? It's a beautiful thing that 80% of those calls are resolved on the phone. No other action necessary. No other action necessary. Not an appointment to a psychiatrist, not an appointment with anybody. It just gets resolved because the person who answers the call is trained to help that person resolve. They're trained in crisis resolution, right? And so they're good at it. You know, they do it all day long, all day, every day. So 80% of those calls are resolved over the phone. If they're not resolved, then that might lead to, if we just follow the arrow, to a mobile crisis team. And so in New Mexico, we're using the acronym MRCT, Mobile Response Crisis Team. And so, but it's the same thing. Picture a minivan with a couple of trained behavioral health professionals in there, and they're headed out to the field, right? They're going behind Allsups. They're going to the Walmart parking lot. They go to Sonic. They go wherever they need to go, right? To the park, wherever they need to go to someone's home. They go wherever they need to go. And 70% of those calls are resolved right there in the field without anything else needed. Sometimes something else is needed, but instead of taking them to either jail or the emergency department, they can be taken to a crisis facility. So in New Mexico, we're calling those CTCs, or crisis triage centers. Here in Santa Fe County, we have a center called La Sala. La Sala is actually two programs in one. One is run by New Mexico Solutions, and it's the Crisis Triage Center. Right next door in the same building is the Santa Fe Recovery Center, where they do detox. And so you put those together, and that's La Sala. And so the mobile crisis team can transport people back to the crisis triage center, which is La Sala. And they can hang out there for hours and hours and hours while people talk to that person, connect them to services, do whatever else is needed for the next steps, including prepping them to get detoxed from substances of abuse, if that's one of the things that needs to happen. They can facilitate just about anything that person needs right then and there. And then they're discharged back into the community, and they're offered post-crisis wraparound. So they don't wait for the other person, you know, they leave, let's say someone leaves the crisis triage center. They don't have to wait for that person to come back in crisis. They actually just go out to wherever they live. And including if they're unhoused, there might be a place where they go and they stay and they sleep, that the folks can go and check on them and see how they're doing. So all of this leads to decreased use of jails, emergency departments, and inpatient hospitalization. So there's a circle there on the left where it's circling the crisis line in 911. And that is a piece that hasn't really been built out just yet. But the idea is that people will call 911 and their call might get transferred over to 988. And so there's a lot of technical issues with that. And that's not something that's going to go live this Saturday. The idea, though, is after Saturday, you're going to see a big media push that Americans themselves won't call 911 first. They call 988 first. 988 can actually contact 911 while the person is on the line talking to the crisis counselor. Um, that's a standard protocol for those kind of calls as they happen already with NMCAL. NMCAL is an acronym for the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line. When someone calls that line, and you all can call the line, by the way, and not be in crisis, you can say, I'm a family member of somebody with a mental health issue, or I'm just calling to make sure this works because I know people who need this line, or I might need this line in the future. So you can call, and you can do the same thing with 988, by the way. If you want to do it at 12:01 or 12:02 a.m., call 988 and see what happens. I think that's a good thing. The more people who know the mechanics of it. But going back to my point, if you call NMCAL, one of the first things they'll ask you is, who am I speaking with? And you say your name, and then they say, do you mind if I get a phone number in case we're disconnected? I can call you right back. And in most cases, the person says, sure, here it is, and they give it to them. And then they will also ask, would you mind sharing your location with me in case there's an emergency and I have to contact 911? Now, of course, someone can make the phone call and say, no, I'm not giving you any of that. I want to be anonymous, right? And they give a fake name, and maybe they just say, no, I don't want to tell you my name. I don't want to tell you anything. I just want to talk. And they say, okay, go right ahead. What's on your mind, right? So they don't push the issue, but it's a standard protocol to collect whatever you can at the beginning of the call. So that's the red circle. 911 will eventually transfer people over to 988. But 911 operators, there still needs to be a lot of training for them so that they feel comfortable making that transfer. In most cases, 911 will still always send, first responders, as in law enforcement and fire and rescue, to a scene rather than anybody else. Just because that's what they've been doing for many, many decades. That's what they're trained to do. That's the way they're programmed. And that's okay for now. It's going to be a slow process. But the process eventually will be that less people call 911 overall. And when 911 gets calls, if nobody is in danger and a crime is not being committed, they might say, I think you'd be better served by talking to a crisis counselor. Please hold while I transfer that call if you're okay with that. And then they do that. But again, that's in the future. That's not Saturday future, but maybe probably 2 to 3 years from now, future. Who can access 988? Anyone. Through voice, chat, or text. Young people love text. Working people in front of a computer all day, they're the only ones that like chat. They'll go to a website and maybe they'll chat. But most other people, if they're not below the age of maybe 25, 30, they're going to prefer voice. And so, but any of those three avenues will get you where you need to go. Voice, chat, or text. In New Mexico, or I should actually specify, if you have a New Mexico area code, 80% of those calls go to our local crisis line, which is NMCAL. What about the other 20%? 20% who are routed elsewhere are often veterans who have their own veteran-operated crisis line. Or if they speak Spanish, they get routed to one of 3 nationwide Spanish-speaking crisis call centers. So one of the things that was curious to me is, well, wouldn't New Mexico be one of those? We have so many Spanish speakers in New Mexico, and that although that's very true, unfortunately, the New Mexico Crisis and Access Line has never been able to hold on to enough bilingual crisis counselors to be able to staff that line 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that's what you really need to be recognized nationally as a Spanish-speaking crisis call center. So it's a workforce issue. They just can't find enough people to do that. And persons with hearing challenges can use the NMCal TTY line, which is right there, 855-227-5485. Beyond Spanish, there is this language line solutions that hospitals also use. Doctors' offices use, a lot of folks use it, and they provide translation services over the phone in over 250 additional languages. Right now, text and chat are only going to be available in English. So what happens when someone calls? So again, starting this Saturday, when someone calls, they first hear a greeting message while their call is routed either to a local location, or it might say press 1 if you would like to access the veterans line, press 2 if you are a Spanish speaker, and if not, you just stay on the line and it gets kicked to NMCal. So once that phone call goes through, the trained crisis counselor will answer the phone, listen to the caller, understand how their problem is affecting them, provide support and share resources if needed. And if the local crisis center is unable to take the call, the caller will automatically be routed to a national backup crisis center. In New Mexico, it's getting dark enough for me to turn on some lights here. In New Mexico, if NMCal is unavailable, it goes to Agora. So Agora Crisis Line is operated by UNM, a staff of volunteers that are very well trained. And Agora has been around for at least 20 years, if not longer. But they're a smaller operation than NMCal, but that's the pass-through. It goes to NMCal, then to Agora. Then if that doesn't work for some reason, then it will go to a national line where still a crisis counselor will answer the call. I'm gonna pick a, oh, great. Thanks, Tom, for putting the NMCal number in the chat box. All right, so texting is already live. Texting at NMCal went live last Friday because they were being proactive. They wanted to make sure it worked before it really launched on Saturday. So texting is already operational. You can text NMCal. You would have to go to their, I'm not sure exactly how that works, if there's a dedicated number for texting, but come Saturday, you can actually text 988. You don't need a special number come Saturday. So I don't know how they're doing it just for this 1 week of soft testing that they've been doing. Let's see. One of the things that's interesting that I just want to brag about New Mexico just for a moment, because often we're always at the bottom of every list. Well, it turns out that we are one of 5 states in the country that have a statewide crisis and access line. Only 5. And so that's one of the reasons why you haven't really seen a lot of media pushing 988 as a crisis line. The federal government was giving states 2 full years to ramp up services and figure out how they're going to implement 988. And so it turns out that we're actually better positioned than most once this goes live on Saturday. A lot of other states, you're going to call 988 and it's going to ring at some national center that doesn't really know about resources in your community. So we are ahead of the game with that. So when someone chats 988, people seeking chat services will be provided with a pre-chat survey before connecting with a trained chat counselor that identifies the main area of concern. If there's a way to chat with a crisis counselor, a wait time message will appear. So what about privacy? So 911, you can actually call 911 and not even be verbal. Let's say you're having a serious medical event. You can dial 911 and they can actually use geolocation to find out where you are and dispatch a crew to where you are based on geolocation. 988 is not going to have that feature. It doesn't have it, and there's no plans for it to have that feature. Just because the fear is that people won't call it if they um, want to remain anonymous. Another way to think about that is it could even just be a symptom of whatever's happening for them, where a heightened paranoia kicks in, and so they would definitely not call a number where they can be tracked. And so that's a very clear message at the federal level from SAMHSA that there are no plans to enable geolocation for 988 calls. So if the person doesn't give their address, their location, they don't want to, they can't, there's no real way to get them emergency services through 988. You know, at that point, the crisis counselor may do their best to address the situation through the phone call, or they may say, please hang up and call 911. So that is, so privacy is an issue. We want people to feel like they can call 988 and their privacy is protected at every single level, right? So the network system has several safeguards addressing concerns around privacy. Any personal information that's shared is confidential, is kept confidential, and more importantly, it's voluntary. It's completely voluntary. Some of that information that people give, once the crisis has de-escalated, they do invite them to share some demographic information as far as like age, gender identity, cultural identity, racial identity, all of those things, just so that they can figure out, well, who is actually utilizing the service and who do we need to target outreach to, right? And my sense is going to be that there's going to need to be a concerted effort to get young people and older people to use this. Very different outreach patterns that they're going to have to use. Who's paying for all of this, by the way? How is 988 being funded? So a lot of the setup of 988 is going to be funded by the federal government. It was put into the congressional budget that was signed by President Biden to release funds to states to implement 988 crisis response systems, not just the number, but the entire system. That and there was an act that became law in 2020 that allows states to enact new telecom communication fees to help support 988 operations. So there's already one of those fees that is attached to your phone bill to support 911. You'll see a similar fee at some point to support 988. So that's how that's going to get paid. And of course, feds, the state, local counties, they can all add funds to this, and they will. You know, the state will definitely, they plan on adding some general funds to help communities, especially rural communities, get crisis response teams set up around the state. So is it worth it to spend all that money? So we have projections from 3 different counties in New Mexico. On the left, San Juan County, that's a medium-sized county. Bernalillo County, of course, is the largest population-wise. And then Grant County is more representative of our rural areas. So San Juan County, by the way, think Farmington, that area, upper northwest. Grant County, think Silver City. So you go to TRC, you take a right, and you drive 2 more hours at least to get to Silver City. And so no matter where you look, you can see that the cost savings are going to be about half of what's currently being spent when compared to emergency department and inpatient hospitalization only scenarios. This doesn't even include costs for incarceration or ambulance services. This is just emergency department and inpatient hospitalizations. And it's going to cut those costs in half. So the savings are going to be astronomical to the entire system if we change the way we respond to behavioral health emergencies. So some other studies that highlight the cost. So Washington State Institute for Public Policy, they did a cost benefit analysis for mobile crisis teams and demonstrated cost benefits to the criminal justice system and psychiatric hospitalizations. And people were less likely to be placed in jail or a psychiatric hospital hold. In Arizona, they've had a version of this for some years now. And they found the calls for law enforcement have been reduced 75 to 80%, with 22,000 law enforcement handoffs to mobile crisis teams yearly. And also, just looking at 1 year, 2014, there were 4,433 law enforcement transfers to a mobile crisis team, saving 8,800 hours of law enforcement time. So right now, virtually every law enforcement, what's the word? Law enforcement group, like a sheriff's office, city police, county police, right? They're all understaffed, all of them. Not just in Santa Fe, but nationally. And why? Well, everybody's understaffed. Panera is understaffed. I just went there and grabbed dinner. Panera is understaffed, right? Everyone's understaffed. I'm understaffed. Everyone is understaffed. I know the recovery center is understaffed. We're all understaffed, including law enforcement, including firefighters. I saw on Facebook right now, I've never seen firefighters have to recruit. When I grew up, my cousins wanted to be on the wanted to be firefighters. They waited 1.5 years just to get a test, just to have a shot at becoming a firefighter. Now the fire department is actually recruiting people. It's crazy times we live in. So if 988 can save 8,800 law enforcement hours, you could just imagine how important that is. Freeing up law enforcement to do law enforcement, right? Not tying them up with something that would be better served by somebody who's trained to deal with it. More pictures from the Farmington area. I go to the Farmington area quite a bit, actually. And so sometimes I stop and you'd be amazed at what an iPhone can capture these days. So, so how will 988 be advertised? In the coming months, you will see advertising campaigns at the national and local level. These will be public service announcements on TV, radio, billboards, social media, etc. And local efforts to get the word out include public information sessions like this one. Although we at Serna Solutions are doing the bulk of these presentations, we're not the only ones. There is a woman named Cindy Sackman. She's a dear colleague of mine. She's doing these in tribal communities across the state. And I have another colleague named Ernie Holland who lives out in Hobbs. And he wanted to do Hobbs. And Hobbs is very hard to get to. It's about a 6-hour drive through a lot of nothing to get there. So I was happy to let Ernie take Hobbs. And so, but the idea of the master plan though is to train other people more at the local level to deliver this training. And one of the plans that I have that's just happened today is to train a group of promotoras in Doña Ana County. So promotoras are community health workers that work with primarily the monolingual Spanish speaking population of a community. And so they're lay people who get trained to be a community health representative, basically, and give community messaging in their local communities. We have promotoras here in Santa Fe, and so that might be something that we do here too. So I'll see how it goes with Doña Ana County. But the idea is that we do want to do as much as we can to get the word out about 988. And when we do this, part of it, an adjunct benefit to all of this is we're also just getting the word out that behavioral health crises are normal, that they can be resolved, maybe hopefully reduce some of the stigma around them, right? So there's a lot of benefits in this push that we're doing for 988. In New Mexico, I've only seen one 988 billboard. It happened to be in Albuquerque, but you can bet starting next week, you might see billboards. And again, you'll hear some TV and radio spots. Those are, for the most part, the first round of those are already produced and they're just kind of in the can waiting for Saturday. And then they'll come out. So here is the New Mexico version of that graphic I showed you earlier with the lines that were just arrows. The reason why I like this one better is not just the mountains and the hot air balloon, but because they're not arrows, right? This shows that it's actually a much more dynamic system than what that first graphic leads people to believe. But it really rests on the hot air balloon. We're calling the hot air balloon air traffic control, right? So that would be NMCal. So that's where all the other decisions get made, is at the call center level. So the call center can call 911, can prep somebody to go into a crisis triage center, can alert and dispatch a mobile crisis team, can make an appointment for someone to go to a behavioral health provider, or just release them back to their community and they make a plan like, I'm going to go talk to my priest or my pastor, you know, whatever they want to do. That's where the community support happens. And it could be not just one of these things, but maybe a couple of things. These things might be the most appropriate response. So it's much more dynamic and a lot less, I guess, linear, because not only, you know, that first pass through is the Crisis Now helpline, but in practice, 911 might also take somebody to a crisis center. 911 might dispatch a mobile crisis team. This is already happening in Santa Fe County. So I'm not sure if you know this, but you probably do. But in Santa Fe County, we have something called the ARU, Alternative Response Unit. The Alternative Response Unit is dispatched through 911. It includes a social worker as well as law enforcement. They show up on scene to a behavioral health crisis. And at that point, they might call the crisis response team out of the crisis triage center, and they work together. And what happens next is sometimes it just gets resolved. Sometimes they do need to go to the hospital. Sometimes they just go to the crisis triage center from there. So Santa Fe County is ahead of the game, you know, in a state that's ahead of the game. So it's not perfect. I don't want to give the impression that it can't be improved, but I will say just the fact that we have a mobile crisis response team, we have a crisis triage center, we have the ARU, Alternative Response Unit, we have all of those things already in place. So we are ahead of the game. Now, they do need to be more robust, right? But it's a lot easier to add to something than it is to create something from scratch. And we did a lot of that heavy lifting already in the county. So, which is, by the way, very different when I go to a place like Farmington or Silver City and talk to them, because a lot of them don't have anything in place. Not a team, not an agency that's going to put together a team, nothing, right? So we are ahead of the game. When I say that in Santa Fe, I really do mean it. The idea is that we want to move from crisis as being a disruption in someone's care to actually an opportunity for better coordination of care. That's the hope, right? Too often now, if someone's in crisis, it's just its own ordeal that can be traumatizing. And so we don't want that to happen so much. We want it to actually be a response that is not traumatizing, but part of the therapeutic process. That's the hope. All right. So I'm going to speed up a little bit. I kind of got in love with my own stories there, but I'm going to speed it up just in the interest of time. So I'm not going to read everything on every slide at this point, but I am very happy to share these with all of you. a version of these slides that you can share. And so mobile crisis response team, the thing I want to say about that is the designs are not to have law enforcement as part of them. If law enforcement is needed, law enforcement needs to go, and then they can dispatch a mobile crisis team. But the mobile crisis team itself should be, in most cases, it's going to be a 2-member team with what's called a peer support worker, which I'm sure a lot of you know. Maybe some of you are one. So it'd be a peer support worker and a licensed therapist. Sometimes there might also be a nurse attached to that, but very typically it'll be a 2-person response. Crisis triage centers. Ours is following the outpatient 23-hour model. The 23-hour model doesn't mean literally that it stays open for 23 hours. It just means that it's not 24/7. And so, so once you get into something that is 24/7, some of the cost savings that you're hoping evaporate really quickly, because once it's 24/7, you do need medical care on site 24/7. And so that's one of the reasons why most communities will not have a 24/7 crisis triage center. These centers are licensed by the Department of Health. Those regulations were only written 2 years ago. So that's how new all this stuff is. In New Mexico, we have 3 crisis triage centers that I'm aware of: Santa Fe, Albuquerque, Las Cruces. There was a couple more that didn't quite make it just because they didn't have the right staffing pattern, because again, workforce shortages. And so, but those are the only ones that I'm aware of currently that are doing that. If we are going to ever have a crisis triage center for people under the age of 18, it basically needs to be its own building. You can never you can never combine those services, and the Department of Health wouldn't allow you to. All right. Oh, another important thing about this, sorry, I jumped too far ahead. All services are only provided to voluntary clients. So again, cost savings becomes an issue here. If you're going to hold people against their will, you need a completely different staffing pattern. You need to have on-site security around the clock, and that security needs to be able to respond immediately if there's an issue with somebody who doesn't want to be there. So for rural hospitals, some of them are going to have to partner with a behavioral health agency, and that agency is supposed to dispatch a master's level clinician, actually, or a peer support worker, or both, to their emergency room or emergency department within 30 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so that's how they're going to do a crisis response team in rural areas where they can't seem to get enough people together for a team. The team will actually go to the hospital and meet the person there, which is not a huge cost savings because they're at the hospital, but it's better than if they can keep them out of being admitted to the hospital. There's some cost savings there. But the real story there is not the cost savings, it's a more skilled response. It turns out that hospitals are horrible, by and large, at treating mental health issues. The staff are not trained in dealing with that. I mean, there's been so many horror stories of people at the hospital after just surviving, let's just even say, a sexual assault, and the hospital staff do not respond appropriately. And the person winds up leaving the emergency department rather than getting services because of how they felt interacting with hospital staff. So if you can get mental health staff embedded in emergency departments, that's exactly what needs to happen. Medical professionals do not have adequate training to deal with behavioral health. They just don't. Unless it's their specialty, they just don't, they really don't touch it much. So what about more rural? Talking about frontier, there's allowances to even use something like a hotel as an impromptu crisis triage center. So a crisis response team goes out, gets somebody, they need to be removed from a home because it's escalating. They can use funds to set up shop in a motel, do their crisis counseling sessions there. however long it needs to take before they return them back either home or back to the community, or maybe they transport them into something else like detox or residential care or something. All right, so that's the bulk of the presentation. This is where I usually plug my colleague Cindy Sackerman, who is involved in the New Mexico Mobile Crisis Team Learning Community. She is working with people all over the state to set up mobile crisis teams in their communities. That's kind of a moot point here in Santa Fe, because again, we already have that set up. So she's not really working in Santa Fe. Um, all right, let's do some questions.
Thank you, Brian. Let me throw it open. Everybody know that you've been muted, so if you want to speak, go ahead and do so. Jess, do we have any questions in the Facebook or in the chat?
I'm not seeing any from Facebook, and I think the ones in the chat so far we've answered. So
Great.
Excellent. Well, let me throw some questions out just to break the ice and get
Yeah,
things
sure.
going. When I am I'm with my cell phone and I'm in an area that I don't have regular service, the cell phone tells me that I can only make emergency calls, which means 911 calls. As of Saturday, if I'm in that same situation where I don't have cell service from my provider, but I can make emergency calls, will I be able to dial 988 and reach a crisis line?
You know, Tom, that's a very good question that is unfortunately no, not at this time. But it's more than just a service issue as far as, you know, where you're at geographically. You know, like if somebody has they run out of minutes, for example, right? Or somebody donates a phone to them and they don't have minutes, they just use it as a watch, right? Or a music player. They always can call 911, but they can't call 988 just yet. So that is the plan, though, that they will be able to call 988 even if they don't have minutes, even if they don't have service turned on the phone, they should be able to call 988. But I wish I can tell you when. I haven't been given a time for that. I was in a meeting today where they did give me some estimates for some national things that I can share with you that haven't had time to make its way into the slide. And that is that by the year 2025, the estimates are that 80% of the population of the United States of America will be within 90 minutes of a crisis response team. And by the year 2027, it is estimated that 80% of the population, US population, will be within 90 minutes of a crisis triage center. So that's the national plan. But those are the only estimates that I was given today in the statewide call.
Thank you, Brian. As this rolls out, is the public going to be kept informed of the effectiveness of this, especially in individual communities? Will there be a web page, or will there be something? Because obviously,
Yeah.
this is the first rollout. It isn't a complete system yet. As it, where will people be able to get fast information about how well it's going someplace, other than just calling 988 and asking and being told that you can't do that yet?
That's a good question. And what I do know is that the state contracted with a tech company to develop what they're calling a 988 dashboard, where it'll be basically the clearinghouse for 988 data. And now, as far as who can access that dashboard and how widely accessible that will be, I don't know the answer to that yet. I think that there's still, at least for the first, I don't know exactly how long, maybe the first year, there's going to be some bugs that they're going to want to address before it goes, before it's released for public consumption. Because again, this is really new. I mean, we're still kind of in the pre-game. The game starts on Saturday, And then we actually don't know all the problems that are going to happen with it, not locally or nationally. But the good news is the state is being proactive in developing all the inputs and everything they need to on the back end, hopefully, to collect the data and then to have a 988 data dashboard.
Okay. Will there be, I mean, one of the things that I've always wanted out of the crisis line that I never thought we really got, maybe just a little bit, is stories are one of the best ways our community learns,
Yeah,
especially stories based on real experience. And it would be invaluable if they could anonymize some of the kinds of calls they get or even construct typical calls and share those in some way with the public, because uh, a lot of the challenges our members faced are similar.
yeah,
First episode psychosis, not continuing to take meds, uh, difficult to family, and it's not all mental illness. It's also just behavioral, people getting along with people, and the extent to which there can be stories, if how the 988 line actually helped people deal with some of these things and kind of what the resolution was. I think there's certainly an audience with the people we serve to just learn more about what happens to them and whatnot, because a lot of what NAMI is people sharing stories and sharing solutions and learning from each other. And I think when you get 988 rolled out and effectively used, there's going to be this tremendous well of what worked information that it would be really valuable if it could be shared, because for a lot of people that would motivate them to call 988 much more than all of the charts and dashboards and everything
sure,
else.
absolutely. And I agree that NMCal has not done a good job with that. The only thing that I've ever seen NMCal do that was sort of like that was they did when they did their grand opening of their new place in Albuquerque. I went, and it wasn't a very well attended event, quite frankly.
Brian, you've frozen on us. Okay. Well, I think we've lost our speaker. Uh, Whatever he was going to say must have been extremely important. Uh, so let me, are there any more questions? Because I haven't been trying to.
Louise had asked, is this rescue resource being presented to the 911 responders? Maybe
Brian, can you answer us? Or is your
oh,
audio
he's
back?
He's back.
I'm back.
Okay.
Sorry
Is
about that.
988 being, are you talking to 911 first responders?
No, I'm not. Um, I'm not exactly sure who's going to be giving them this training or a version of this training. But I want to say that's going to be more of a national effort to train all 911 operators. But as of now, they're not trained. And like I said, they're going to just do what they've always done. So the hope is to intervene before the call gets to 911, rather than depend on them.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Yes, I think you're muted, Patricia. Could you unmute? Thank you. You're muted again. There you go.
How's that?
Yes.
The question is that, you know, resources for families are incredibly rare. I mean, I I might be a little bit too much, but I'm concerned about an adult child of mine, and I'm trying to find resources, and I'm either told that it's really none of my business,
Right.
or that person needs to come in themselves. But we all know that if a person's in denial, that chances of them ever calling this number is never going to happen. But as far as a family, like, if I wanted to find somebody to help with a family intervention, can I call this number? Could they give me a resource? If I wanted to find what the state of detox centers are that are maybe state run, or if there's openings, can I find that information? These are things that I think are very important to assist a person who might or might not be in denial, might or might not be in crisis, might or might not even think they have a problem, but a family might want to be able to step up and help to if nothing else, to let their loved one know they're loved. So
Sure. Yeah.
if there's resources, if I call this number, if it's not a crisis, I'm looking for resources. Could somebody assist me?
So the real answer is probably not right now. The hope is that that does change in the future. So just, what I mean by that is, right now, the way that NMCal even sees a resource has to do with a computer program called Open Beds. And so service providers like us, or the Santa Fe Recovery Center, everybody, there's some hoops to jump through to get in Open Beds. And then the idea is that we can go online and let them know that, there's beds, in a detox place, right? Or in a residential treatment center, or, for us, we actually have a program that I think might be what you're looking for. Is called the Family Empowerment Project. It's based on craft. And, we have an online group right now that has space, but, we're still trying to get into Open Beds, but we're a small program, but the idea is that eventually everything is going to be connected behind the scenes through a program called Open Beds. And all the people who are out there trying to help other people, we all log in and we're all using the same program and we're all sharing resources. So, but it's going to take some time for that too, but, ideally you can call 988 and get some help for your loved one. And at the very least, they should be able to listen to you, offer some empathy and validation, and maybe connect you to a program for families. But going back to this thing where everybody's short-staffed, that's always going to be an issue too. I can't think of any place that doesn't have a waiting list, really, or at least from time to time doesn't have a waiting list. Our waiting list in Albuquerque is really long, but our waiting list in Santa Fe, right now, I think today, we don't have a waiting list today, which is the first time in about 14 months, actually. But I just added 4 more people to our employee list. So I think, we don't have a waiting list today, but everybody else I know has a waiting list. And this doesn't address that. Even if things are really well linked, if there's not anybody doing the job, right? But I hope that answers your question, Patricia. It's supposed to work better and better as we go.
I hope so, because
Yeah.
crisis could be a silent thing too. I mean, where families are silently suffering because there really isn't enough resources, not only in our state, but nationwide. I mean, this is a wonderful rollout. What a great thing. Having police officers come and basically, do things that they are not comfortable doing and causing more harm is a wonderful idea. But I think that families need a little bit more assistance as well. But I appreciate all of this. Thank you so much.
Thank
Sure.
you, Patricia. Does anyone else have any questions?
I do. This is Socorro.
Hi.
Thank you, Tom and Brian, for the wonderful information today. It comes a little late for my loved one.
Sorry.
but no, she's doing okay right now. But
Okay.
there was a lot of trauma that happened about a year ago. But I'm just so excited about what is coming up. And I'm a school counselor, and when I lived in Houston, I was the crisis counselor for the district. And I really got interested, Brian, and when you talked about the mobile unit and the people that, and I was wondering um, what I would need to do to be part of that, to be the peer support worker. With everything that has happened to my daughter, I feel like giving back and being part of the solution is what is going to bring some healing for me. And so
Yeah.
I was thinking about that when you mentioned that.
So Socorro, what I'm gonna ask you to do, if you're okay with this, it's actually easier if you email me,
Okay.
and I'll recognize your name more or less what you're looking for, and then I can email you back, um, like just some things to help you get on that road. You know?
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Do we
Sure.
have any more questions? Well, with that, I'd like to thank our speaker one more time. Brian, I really appreciate you taking the time talking to us. We wish you
Sure.
the best of luck as you communicate this rollout to the state. We ask that you keep us informed as any new information comes out. NAMI Santa Fe does a newsletter once a month. Jessica does it. And we'd love to include new information about this in the newsletter periodically as it comes out.